My name is Merrill Dubrow, CEO of Mark Research. I'm a 35-year veteran of the research and insights community and the host of our podcast, On the Mark. On the Mark is focusing on executives and thought leaders in the world, sharing their insights, strategies, and personal experiences. I promise this podcast will be filled with tough, pointed questions with real, insightful, and emotional answers. Today is my good friend, Michael McCrary, CEO and founder of PureSpectrum. Michael, welcome to the On the Mark podcast.
Thank you, Merrill. Happy to be here.
Hey, let's start with just describe your insights career to the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into the insights industry around 2003. Prior to that, had been working in print media and was really pretty comfortable with data. I actually was repping a magazine called Midwest Living, and it wasn't the easiest ad sell to agencies in New York. So I had to become pretty comfortable with explaining audiences and who they're missing and why it's an important group. So from there, I could see the handwriting on the wall that print media was going to have a hard time because this was around the internet really taking off. And got to work in Greenfield Online. And that was kind of the very beginning of, I guess, the race for online sampling. I spent about 7 years there, starting off as a sales rep, working my way up to a regional manager, and then ultimately being in charge of all of North American sales. And from there, after Greenfield was sold to Microsoft and then ultimately passed on to Luna, moved over to Cint, where I spent just a little over a year helping them get a foothold in North America. And that's probably my shortest stint doing anything in the industry. Learned a lot there, but from there moved on to work for what's now called Lucid, helping them build their business and grow that business as well. And ultimately, early 2016, made the decision to start my own business and started working on PureSpectrum, and that's pretty much the journey.
That's great, Michael. The journey, which I love that word, it's really unique, and I think it's appropriate. So the journey, when we think about mentors and we think about people who have helped you along the way, I mean, think about it. You've been in the insights industry for about 17 years now, not 35 or whatever that I've been here. I have a lot of gray hairs. You're obviously younger, and
I think I've got you on gray hair though.
I don't know about that. I'm not sure, but maybe. But you know what? Who helped you along the way? I mean, think about that. So you come into an industry at a pretty nice level and you don't really know much about it. I know you knew about data, but really not a lot more about the insights community. Who started to help you early on?
Yeah, my first boss was Keith Price. I think a lot of people would know him. And, I learned a lot from Keith, just about how to be a professional salesperson, how to follow through, and how to conduct business. For me, I think mentors and managers or mentors and leaders are not always the same. They can be, but if I think back to an early mentor, it's actually one of my clients who helped me learn some of the nuances of the industry, and that's another common friend of ours. That's Michelle Elster at Raven Research. She really, really took me under her wing on probably to help her because I didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't understand why certain things didn't fit online, didn't understand a lot of the nuances of the industry. And she just spent a lot of time, helping me understand why a certain type of research product or method couldn't be done online, right? Because I was trying to sell everything online. And instead of just telling me no, she would say, let me explain to you why this sort of project would do better in a telephone setting or in an in-person setting. And I don't think I've ever properly thanked her for, giving me some of that underlying understanding of, not everything is a one size fits all, but she took the time, to explain it without being annoyed. She really was a teacher.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because I know Michelle very, very well. I'm only doing 56 podcasts this year. Michelle's already been on the podcast, On the Mark. She's an amazing leader. She's a second generation researcher. Her kids make it the third. Really impressive executive who's given a lot back to the industry and to a lot of people and mentored a lot of people. So that's really nice to hear. Um, in terms of mentors, it's kind of interesting in my career. I don't think I started out saying, okay, in my 20s, I'm going to go look for a mentor, right? I think it just kind of naturally happened. So I had a few mentors early on. I had Marianne Schaefer and Sandy Schwartz and definitely the late John Bonney, who really helped my career and really taught me and took the time. When you talk about Michelle Elster, who took the time to really describe to you why certain things work and why certain things don't work and how you should be looking at things. Was the same true with you, where you just kind of naturally fell into, hey, I've got these kind of people who are mentors, and it as opposed to saying, hey, would you be my mentor?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I don't think that I've ever set out seeking a mentor.
Right.
I think I'm naturally curious,
Yep.
and some people are willing to invest and give to you without any ask in return, and so those things just kind of happen. And it's not like they need to be your boss, right? I think people can look at their bosses, naturally have an opportunity to be mentors for you. But I think there's certain opportunities where, I don't know, for me, a mentorship is a two-way street, and they need to be giving to you, and you need to be giving to them. I mean, I don't even know what I give to the mentors, except for maybe they enjoy that I might listen and actually take their advice, but. So to me, like finding a mentor wasn't a mission. It just kind of happened.
I'm the same way. So at the top of your mentor list, because I'm sure you have maybe 3 or 4 over your career, who's at the top of your list?
Without a doubt, it would be Al Ingrasani. And I'm sure you've seen the news. He passed away last week, which is,
Yep.
uh, I'm getting choked up just talking about it. But Al Ingrasani, hands down, is my top mentor. And Al you remember, he became the CEO of Greenfield right around 2005, and I at the time had moved out west. I came out to California at that time, and I wouldn't even really say that Al at that time hadn't identified that he was gonna be my mentor. And but I just always enjoyed his company, and just little anecdotes like whenever he would come visit the West Coast and I was the regional VP, I just make sure that I made sure he had a good time. Took him to Lakers games. Made sure that we spent time where it wasn't just around going over numbers and business. And then every time I would go back to Connecticut, he would know I was coming, and he'd set up dinners, and so we developed, I would say, more of a professional friendship at that point. He was very senior, had a lot on his hands, but he always made the time. He was always like, yes, let's have dinner. Yes, let's have breakfast. And that was kind of the beginning of it. And then, he moved on after basically the same time I did, after Greenfield sold to Microsoft. And, a few years later, 3 years later, we almost kind of a quiet period. We kind of email back and forth, how you doing, what you doing. But when he landed back at Harris Interactive, we ended up re-engaging on more of a commercial level, where the company I was at ended up he kind of helped fast track adoption of the technology that I was selling, and there was mutual benefit there. It was a big deal for me in a new company, and I think it really helped him in his turnaround the second time around at Harris Interactive. And then it was the same. It was we didn't always talk about business, and every time I would go to New York, it was the first email I'd send, Al, I'm coming to New York, would love to see you. And it was always like, if he was there, like, absolutely, let's get a dinner. Absolutely, let's get a breakfast. Started to get to know more about him as a man, his family, and how much he cared about his family. How that was, without a doubt, he was a very driven man, him. But,
Yeah.
no matter what you were doing and what was going on, you learned about what was going on with his daughters and, and his grandchildren, and just how much he adored them. And he took a special interest in what was going on with me as well. He knew my wife and knew my kids, and kind of knew, always wanted to know how they were doing. And just, so that was kind of where I began to be like, this is cool, right? It's not all about business, and we've developed a rapport. that's not just how can we do business together? Really, really things I think crystallized for me when I was ready or wanted to start a business. And, he was one of the guys I reached out to because, he was obviously an astute business person. And he was just generous and helpful, and if anybody's ever started a business and you have to raise capital for the first time, which, I raised a little bit to start this business. I mean, it is a foreign language and you feel really overwhelmed, really overmatched. And so it was just a guiding hand. And, there was never a time where I'm like, hey, I have a question about this, where he'd be like, I'm so busy, I can't help you. It was always like, call anytime, right? Just call anytime. So that's when it really, for me, became clear. Like, I think about it almost like the movie Rocky, where you have the trainer and he's in your corner, right? And he's like, he's there, he's rubbing your shoulders, you're bleeding, and you're beat up, and it's the 12th round, and he's like, "Come, you got this, and you never have to worry that he's doing anything, but he's in your corner, right? Like he is backing you up and doesn't have any ulterior motives. So he became my go-to guy for anything. If I didn't know what to do with a contract, or I didn't know what to do with investor relations, or whatever it was, I could go to him. And the interesting thing, I think, is that you would expect him to always tell you to fight, right? Always have to fight. I trusted him so much where he could even say, like, I wouldn't fight this. You just need to, Michael, hold your nose, right? Just take the deal, right? Just hold your nose and do this. So it was just good advice that I could trust.
It's so funny because there's so many things I want to interject here about Alan Grisani. I've had the pleasure. I have known him, worked for him. He's a guy who, in my opinion, when Harris Interactive bought Total Research, they got the upper hand because they got Alan Grisani. I think the company had grown, Harrison Interactive had grown so quickly, so fast, and went from this $5 million company to about $160, $70, $80 million quickly. And Al was the guiding force. He was that calming force. And he did it a few times. He was a guy, it's interesting. I've worked for a number of people who, early on in my career, they'd be yellers and screamers. And they forced you almost to be scared of them and forced you to really pay attention. Al, it was interesting. Al was a pretty soft-spoken guy. His words were so powerful. And he was a guy who had a model. He stuck to the model, and it worked with every company. And he not only saved Harris once, but twice. And I think that he's just that unique guy that everybody should listen to. And it's funny because one of my mentors is Sandy Schwartz. And your story about, take the deal, I remember her helping me think about the position to be CEO and president of Mark Research. And, we were looking at the contract and I was bouncing some ideas off of him. And he said, listen, you can do what you want. They want you. You're their guy. Okay, they're convinced you're the one who's going to come in and turn around and be there for many, many years. And, 16 years later, here I am. And the reality is they'll give you whatever you want. If you want to negotiate on salary, you want another, whatever it is, they'll give it to you. But I wouldn't do it. And I asked him why. And he said, look, go in and prove yourself. It's a fair deal. And if you want to negotiate on something, okay, fine. And I negotiated on time, length of contract, because when I dealt with Omnicom, I just got different answers, Michael, on the situation at the company and basic questions that should have been able to be answered weren't. So the only thing I negotiated on time, and it was really a savior from Sandy Schwartz to doing that to me. So I know that what Al meant to you. And, it's not just you. Al meant so much to so many people. I mean, he's a unique individual that was a turnaround. I mean, a lot of people say they're a turnaround specialist, but when you look under the hood, they really aren't. They maybe have done it once. He did it over and over and over again.
I was a big believer in process on process on process. And so this 3-year, blueprint was a process. He knew what he would do when he first got in, which was evaluate the team, right? And when he first joined Greenfield, people called him Chainsaw Al. They're like, oh, he's going to come in here and cut everything. And really, that's not exactly how it played out. What he did is he identified what he would call his lieutenants, right? Who are the people that I'm going to bring close to me to help me execute this plan, right? And there are a number of people who will listen to this who'll be like, "Yep, I remember him saying that." And he would equitize them, right? He would make sure that they shared in the upside, and he would also, although driving the plan, he would enable you to actually execute the plan, right? And I think I learned a lot about that just from a even pre-mentorship, which is that if you identify the right people as a leader, you have to let them execute, right? Which also means making mistakes. You want to minimize the size of mistakes they can make, but there's nothing worse than having talented people that feel like you're going to micromanage them, and you're gonna want to direct everything they do. First of all, you're never going to have the time to do it, right? So you're going to be working with imperfect information, and second, they're going to feel undermined and not like you trust them, and they will then go on and find some other place that they enjoy. What's the old saying that people don't quit companies, they quit bosses?
Yep, it's true. I know I have. Have you?
I would say that there are times when the relationship or the trust level with the boss deteriorated to a level where it was unsustainable. It's just, you wake up every day and you're like, I don't want to do this today. I like, this doesn't make me feel good waking up and doing this for that person.
Yeah, it's interesting because to me, it happened at Elric and Lavage. I had 3 bosses in a span of 7 months. I was a senior vice president. I still have a lot of takeaways from that boss, even though he was the worst boss I ever had. And the takeaway was he never gave me a chance. He had preconceived ideas. He didn't know the business. He didn't know our business. He didn't know the players. He didn't know what people's skills were. And he brought in his own team and didn't really give a number of people a chance, and I was one of them. And he did subsequently, about 5 years after that, actually apologize to me, which was interesting. But I've taken that negative into a positive, because when I came into Mark, or when I came into another situation in a leadership position, I actually remembered that and knew it bothered me and didn't make rash decisions. I remember when I went to Harris Interactive on day 2, and they said, "Hey, you need to go fire this person." I'm like, "Okay. Can I ask you why?" "Well, yeah, he's not doing really, really well, and he's doing this and he's doing that, and he's on probation." I said, "Well, you put me in charge of this, right?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, why don't you give me a chance to evaluate before I fire the person? Because I don't understand, if you thought they were so horrible, why didn't you fire them last week, last month, or last quarter?"
Exactly.
And I was able to work with this individual, turn him around, and he actually made what was Harris Interactive's president club 3 years in a row. And I think that if you had 4 or 5 words, Michael, I'm going to make this hard, 4 or 5 words to describe your mentor, Al Angrisani, what would they be? Like, what are some of the key words that you think that describe him?
Giving, like just giving of his time, intelligent, compassionate, a friend, just a friend, and spiritual. He's a very spiritual man. Not many people know that.
No, that is great. So, what advice do you have? Because you and I didn't search out in our 20s or even in our 30s, perhaps, to say, "Oh, I got to go find a mentor." But let's say the listeners who are in their 20s, 30s, what advice would you give them to go find a mentor and to establish that relationship and get that guidance to help them throughout their career?
Yeah, I think you said it. It's established the relationship, right? So I would say, if you identify people that you think you're aspirational, like, I would like to be able to operate at that person's type of level, right? Develop a relationship. It takes time, right? Relationships don't happen overnight. I mean, there's probably 2, 3 dozen dinners and lunches and breakfasts between now before the rapport started. At that point, just be careful of who there's difference between like idolizing people and mentors, because to me, a mentor is not someone you just look up to. This is a good person. Like, you vetted them yourself, you got to know them, you see how the way they make decisions, and then you're like, all right, this is a solid person that is not just a famous person or a person in a senior position, because there are plenty of people in senior positions that are dirtbags. They're just not good people. So I would say develop rapport, relationship. Don't be afraid to ask an executive, no matter what level you are, like, hey, I'd like to have a coffee sometime. Right? But don't come on to them too strong. Like, hey, great, thanks for this coffee. Can you be my mentor? Like, you got to let it. You got to let it build so that they also can take an interest in you and your career, and you know, and choose carefully. And oftentimes you won't even know you chose it. It just will happen. Just invest the time, build the relationships with people that you think might be a good fit for a mentorship.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, I've had some amazing mentors. And I didn't realize some of the learnings until 5-6 years afterwards, right? There's some things that John Bonney said to me when I gave notice and I left the company back in the day in Quick Test in 1991. He looked at me and he said, "We're even." "Sorry, John, what does that mean?" He said, "We're even." I'm like, I apologize. What do you mean? He said, "Look, Merrill, you were here for 6 years. We paid you fairly. You gave everything you could to the company. We're even." And the reason I tell that boring story is I never knew what that meant till about 3 or 4 or 5 years later. Because, Michael, let me ask you this. You've been in a lot of companies. How many times can you actually say to somebody who's leaving for the last time, that last day when they leave, "We're even too"? What percentage do you think you can say we're even, that both sides feel we're even?
That's a tough question, because I don't know. I think things are often not even. I think
Right. Well, right. Yeah, right. I would say for me, it's probably 20% of the time max. And I never knew what that was. But he still has a profound relevance on my life even now. And I never knew. It's interesting because Sandy Schwartz and John Bonney, they worked together. And Sandy was number one. John was number two. And John was a great number two. But I don't think he ever had the wherewithal to be the top guy. His skill sets were much better to be second in charge and have somebody who he reported to. And it really worked. I mean, it wasn't, it was just something that he had this ability to really communicate with younger people, older people. It didn't matter whether it was gender, age, experience. I mean, he was such a great mentor that he could adapt his style to whoever he was talking to. And that's a real talent. And I always saw that talent in Al Angrisani. Al always, for me, he showed interest in whoever he was talking to. And Al, we got to remember, most people don't know, but Al was a political giant. He was very involved in politics, made it to a very high level, was very influential. And you never felt like Al was looking down on you. He had really unique skills, amazing man, really is.
He was one of a kind. I miss him. I still hear his voice. He had a very distinct voice. It's a very, very
sure did.
There's nobody else with his voice, and I still, to this day, which is I really didn't talk to him much the last month. He was feeling well. I still will, when I'm making a big decision, I right now I think, like, what would Al say? Like, what would Al say? Yeah. So even though he's not here with us, I truly believe that he will continue to guide me. And he's got 2 books out, right? So it's funny, I can't even read his books without hearing his voice. It's like he's narrating them to me. And so that's comforting, right? It's last week I've been kind of digging back into his books. He's just a great man, and I know his family's really probably in a lot of pain. He's a lot of grandchildren, and he's got his daughters that absolutely adore him, and and son-in-laws. And that was the number one thing for him. For me, he almost, I would say, he even became almost like a second father to me. That's how much time we spent, and I will definitely miss him. Already do.
Yep. Yeah. Without question, the greatest compliment that we could ever give somebody is the fact that somebody touches so many lives. And Al Angrisani did that. Sandy Schwartz has done that. Michael, thanks for spending some time with me today. You've been listening to Michael McCrary, CEO of PureSpectrum. This is the On the Mark podcast. My name is Merrill Dubrow. Have a great day.
Thanks, Merrill.